Hey everyone, welcome to Around the Farm, the podcast about all things ag. I'm your host, Clint Schaffer, and today we're joined by Steve Nicholson, a grain and oilseeds market analyst with Rabo Finance, who's going to give us a look into the markets and all those key focus areas that we need to be thinking of going into spring. Stay tuned. Hey, Steve, thanks for joining us here on Around the Farm again.
It's great to be here, Clint. Good to see you again. Hope all's well.
Yeah, all is well. So, I mean, it's been a little over a year, I think, since we had you as a guest, and it sounds like you have some big changes that have happened here.
Yeah, we've made some changes here. I guess it's a promotion. I'm now the global sector strategist for grains and oilseeds for Rabobank globally. So my charge, if you have it here, is to deal not just in North America or U.S., is to deal with all the research around grains and oilseeds globally. So my major thrust, if you have, is to manage that research agenda for the bank on the grain and oilseed side. But I will tell you, there's a lot of other things that come with it. Some that were passed along, said, here, you can have this now. And there were others that, just happened, of course, in the course of what happened here with the war. So a lot of things happening.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a pretty big change. Has that changed? I mean, time zones and things of that nature that you work in?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So I get less sleep now because, of course, Europe wants to do these in the middle of the day, their day. Well, for me, that's 5 a.m., 5:30 a.m. in the morning, which I try to avoid, but I don't really have a lot of choice, because if you try to do a global call, and if you're in Europe and you do middle of the day, you have to get us early in the morning, you get, Asia, they're 10, 11 o'clock at night. So it does do the challenges. So it makes my days a little bit longer. But, it's easy. I will say here in the States, it's fairly easy because you can deal with Europe in our morning, and then I can deal with Asia and, Australia late in our afternoon. So that's really easy. It's easier than it is for the Europeans to do that.
And I mean, it just sounds like you just need to drink more coffee, right? That's the primary thing right there.
Yeah, I'll do a shameless commercial. I'm not a coffee drinker. I'm a Coca-Cola drinker. So I drink more Coke these days. Yes.
There we go. Well, I tell you what, it sounds like you've had a lot of changes, but I'd say a lot of farmers have a lot of changes since the last time that we've talked to you. I mean, this has been a pretty wild ride. Where do you see the kind of the remainder of this season going when it comes to commodity prices?
Yeah, it is, and I just want to preface this. This is for farmers, for agribusiness, for everyone along that supply chain. And I was talking to a colleague of mine we are the same age, and there's so many moving parts. And I don't recall a time, with the exception of potentially the farm crisis in the 1980s, where there's so many moving parts, all the time. And not just, every other week. It's like every day there's another moving part. So I think that's one thing we have to acknowledge up front and say, we don't know how this will all come out when it's all said and done. But having said that, I think from a price perspective, and we just finished our baseline outlook here in the bank for U.S. grains and oilseeds. And it's a positive outlook. Prices look good as we even in the short term, medium term, and even longer term. Longer term, of course, they declined a bit because we start to see production ramp up. But when we look at the fact is that prices will be above kind of the 10-year average if you look back. Stocks are going to be below the 10-year average when you go back. And so it all adds up to a very, high prices. But at the same time, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about inputs, we see input prices coming up as well. So, but I think from a gross revenue standpoint, I think gross revenues will be good. But one caution at that is, depending on, it didn't matter where you are on the supply chain, expect a lot of volatility. That's the name of the game.
Yeah, you mentioned the farm crisis of the 80s, and I've heard that a lot, and a lot of even conversations come back into not only input prices that you talked about there earlier, but even interest rates and things of that nature
Right.
that might be climbing up. What kind of, I mean, are you seeing trends that are kind of pointing in that direction, or are we still open for a lot of change?
No, I think we're open for a lot of change. I'm not seeing another farm crisis if you have it. Definitely interest rates are trending higher. Of course, inflation, we already know we're already there. Certainly not to the levels we saw in the late 70s. But we continue to see good exports. But the fact is, exports will be, they will come to the U.S., they will come to Australia, they'll come to Canada, they'll come to Europe, and they'll come to South America because there's no place else to go for corn and wheat in the world. You have to come to those places. So I don't think that we're in a farm crisis mode. Interest rates would have to get a lot higher. And I think the fact that exports are going to be fairly well supported will be good. And also, you're not coming into this with huge stocks. I mean, you're in a position where stocks are, and frankly, are going to contract a little bit more, which will keep supporting the prices. So different set of circumstances coming into this situation.
Yeah, you've mentioned the supply chain too, and some of the exports outside of that Baltic Sea region. Is everything kind of back to normal as far as for supply chain side of things?
No, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that things are all back to normal. I mean, you've got a lot of dislocation in thinking about, do you get vessels, barges, trucks in the right place at the right time? And when I'm thinking from the farm to the end user, I mean, the end user, when you think about food manufacturers, there's lots of other things that go into our food products. Can you get packaging? Can you get plastic? Can you get cans? Can you get, lids on cans? Can you get spray nozzles? All that is, and that's also a problem. And if you're using canola, and I'll focus on vegetables for a minute, if you're using canola or sun oil, you're likely having trouble finding that. And so you're going to have to reformulate. So I would say that supply chain is not back to normal yet. And I think that's at least, and I will defer to my supply chain experts within the bank, you're likely a year or more off before you see some normalization of that.
Yeah.
And
look forward to that day, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is, from a farm perspective, think about the supply chain to the farm. We think about fertilizer, we think about chemistry, we think about machinery. Think of all that supply chain has also been very disrupted by non-ingredients for chemistry. Think about machinery not able to get chips. All those sorts of things, to the farmer also has been disrupted as well. So it goes on, how are you going to look at the farm in the middle, either way. So, yep.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about fertilizer, right? That's been a hot topic. I've talked to a lot of friends of mine, and I mean, it's up, significantly from what it was just a year ago. Do you see that impacting, what crops are going to start getting planted? I mean, are you hearing, a shift over to soybeans, or I guess what are you hearing there?
Right. It's interesting. We did some surveying early in the year, and I'll say at Top Producer at breakfast one morning, we had an electronic survey and we did it there. And I remember these numbers from memory, so bear with me. We had about 63% said, we asked them, did high input costs change your view as padding? 63% said no. Of course, that means, you've got another 37% said, yeah, it did change their views. But when we asked them about what they're planning, 69% said they were making no change in their rotation. Now we had 9% more were going to plant corn, 16% were going to plant more soybeans. So it did didn't give you this warm view that, because early on last fall, if you remember, people were saying, we're just going to cut corn and we're going to plant all these soybeans. So it didn't give us the view that we're going to see that huge upset. Now we did see, obviously, last Thursday, we obviously did see more soybeans. I think producers obviously got worried about fertilizer availability. And so you did see that. But, I think when it's all said and done, Mother Nature's going to have the most to say about what gets all planted this spring. I wouldn't be surprised to see a few more corn acres this spring. I don't know that I would say that we'd see less soybean acres, but maybe a few. But we could see a few more corn acres if Mother Nature's cooperated this spring. So I do think that the high input costs obviously had some impact on some people. It also depends on what they had prepared for, if they got ahead of this or not. I think that's the big question too.
Yeah, I mean, outside of that input cost on that, Steve, what are some of the other trends that you're seeing within prices and things of that nature out, let's say, the next 3 to 6 months? Are there things that we need to start watching out for or keeping an eye on?
Yeah, I think there's, I think first, this sounds trite, but I think the weather certainly is number one on that list. I think the other thing, and thinking about it globally, is, China bought 1 million metric tons of U.S. corn. So I think we have to pay attention to China's actions as much as their words. countries are going to be making sure they have food for their populace. And that'd be the other thing I would watch from a price perspective. How do countries react to these, contracting stocks? Do they become a little more protectionist? Do they have, okay, we'll export so much, but there's so much we're going to hold in reserve for our own population. All of those things are going to have an impact on what is happening. The other two things on the domestic side to be watching is, we're starting to see some of this crush ramp up. We've still got 3 years before we get to the maximum of all this investment in crush in North America, but we'll start to see that ramp up in 22. And if you look at maximum crush levels on month, we keep ramping up here in the end of the year. The other thing is renewable diesel. Went back through the plants. You've got a number that have come online. You've got a number that are scheduled to come online this year. And so that's going to be very supportive to the vegetable oil market on top of what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. So there's just a lot of what I would call robust demand out there, and stock situation that will be supporting the prices here over the next 3 to 6 months easily. Now, if Mother Nature cooperates, then we need to come back and re-record this.
No, totally understand that as
Yeah.
well. That's the one fun variable in farming that we can't control, right?
That's right.
That's definitely Mother Nature. One of the things I'd like to talk about there, just because with mentioned, is really around the fuel, right? And you
Yeah.
talk about renewable diesel, which I think will have a pretty hefty impact on our soybean prices. And then if we look over at just even with gasoline going up, a lot of times that's supportive of ethanol as well. Where do you see those two fuels kind of heading to?
We've seen good increase in ethanol demand if you look over this year versus last year, and that's a little unfair, but you look at that corn grind or ethanol production, it's up over 10% versus a year ago. So from a good news story that, we see good demand for corn for ethanol. Now, if you look at the 5-year average, it's not quite as, it's a little bit lagging that 5-year average. And that's, basically because we continue to see more EVs in the road. I mean, there's no question when I go to work when I did go to commute to work, I did see a lot more EVs on the road than I saw just 2 or 3 years ago. That's very anecdotal, but I think it's, it's something to pay attention to. The other thing that's, the Biden administration has come back and has proposed, reinstating the miles per gallon standards that the Obama administration put back. I guess that's 6 or 7 years ago at this point. The Trump administration took off and the Biden administration put back on. So, the automakers are forced to produce, higher mileage cars. That is detrimental to gas consumption, let alone ethanol. But at the same time, I want to talk about, so there's some clouds on the horizon for ethanol because of, change in fuel systems, change in, how we drive, and that's certainly had an bound. But I think there's one hopeful thing to talk about on the biofuel sides is sustainable aviation fuel, SAF. There are two paths. There's a biodiesel path and there's an ethanol path. And we've seen both of those. I don't think that we're going to see electric jets or hydrogen jets or water jets anytime soon. It's still going to be a liquid fuel. And of course, there's a lot of regulation around that because they have to be safe. And so I think for the ethanol industry and biodiesel industry, I don't want to call it a savior. I think that's too strong a word, but I do think it is going to be could be another important component for that industry right now. And high gas prices, as we said right at the beginning, are going to be beneficial to ethanol prices because it does potentially cheapen gas a little bit to the consumer.
Wow. Yeah, I guess I'd never thought about the aviation sector like that of utilizing a lot of those same type of resources that we're utilizing in vehicles.
Yeah, there is. I mean, you start reading, and United and Delta have tested biodiesel or ethanol derivatives for sustainable aviation fuel, and have had good results. So I think the high price of fuel is certainly going to encourage technology to move forward quicker. So they can get to places that maybe are sustainable and cheaper. But at the same time, you look at, liquid fuels and for vehicles and trucks, these high gas prices or high diesel prices as well, are going to fuel technology. What can we find as an alternative versus just using gasoline or diesel?
Yeah, that's one thing I've always said, which is the higher the price of those types of inputs, it usually drives that technology adoption curve, right?
That's
People
exactly
start
right.
getting more and more hungry for the next best thing. And
That's right.
you talked about EV. I spent a lot of times on the road as well, and I couldn't agree more. I was in Hannibal, Missouri the other day,
Hmm.
and stopped at a new Casey's that they put up, and
Yep.
here is a whole bank of Tesla superchargers, right?
Yeah.
And just
Yeah.
something I wouldn't have thought that I would have seen that just a few years ago, right? Especially
No.
in rural America.
I was just going to say that. Yeah. Did you expect to see that in rural America in Hannibal, Missouri? I wouldn't expect to see that. But yeah, there is. I mean, that's the challenge, is to get enough chargers in rural America, because we drive longer distance in rural America, so we need those chargers more often. It's not like if I drive to work or run errands around an urban area, I can come back home and I can charge up and be ready to go for the next trip. But if you're on a long trip in rural America, you don't necessarily have that option.
Hey, sometimes gas stations are few and far between, let alone charging stations, right?
That's exactly right. That is exactly right. You have to kind of plan your trip accordingly. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Steve, I also know that you read quite a bit, and so
I
what's
do.
the next best thing here? What are you what are you looking at here?
Yeah, I haven't had much book reading these days. My days have been put up with a lot. I will say there's two things I read very religiously from an economic point of view. I read The Economist very regularly. And The Economist is very well thought out, very well written, and I would encourage people to look at. The other thing I've really gotten into, I've been a bit surprised, and I guess these are shameless commercials for these two publications, is also Barron's. Barron's is a Dow Jones publication. And they do a nice job every week of summarizing macroeconomic issues and talking about that. Obviously, they have an investment bent to that. But like just 2 weeks ago, the headline cover was about the food inflation and food crisis. And that was their whole cover story. It was a 4-page outlay about what was happening with food, and obviously looking at where is an investor, where would you invest. So those are really two publications, particularly now that macroeconomic factors are such a big impact on our everyday lives, in our grocery store, in our gasoline, in our inputs on the farm, for what we sell to the consumer, in your businesses, all that. So I think those are two things I really am leaning on heavily to make sure I understand all the nuances on the macro side, and also from the geopolitical side, because I believe, on right, wrong, or indifferent, and maybe unfortunately, that's going to be a bigger impact on agriculture than we thought just a short 12 months ago.
Well, yeah, and you hit on a couple of things I'd also like to kind
Yeah,
of dig
sure.
into here. I think as we get into some volatility, right, especially geopolitical volatility, the increase for cybersecurity starts becoming
Yeah.
a bigger and bigger need, right?
Yep.
Where do you see, as far as for cybersecurity in the ag sector, where do you see that kind of taken us? Where do you see, maybe some of the changes or regulations that'll be coming down the line?
Yeah, I think we've certainly seen two ag sector, businesses hit, JBS, and also then New Cooperative in Iowa. And when I say this, particularly to farm groups, and I'll say, I think this is an issue we need to worry about, I get a little roll eye. It's like, well, who's going to hack my computer on the farm? But I make the point to them is that, think about what you're connected to. And if you think about a farmer, that machinery is connected to lots of things. It's connected to GPS. It could be connected to a software provider, or a granular, or a climate, or something else, a conservice, or someplace, other place in the world. And I've sort of joked with them. I said, could you imagine being out there in the middle of the field at planting season, and someone hacks the system you're in, and you're dead in the water? What do you do? Um, and then you start to kind of get the idea, and they start to think about broader perspective beyond the farm. And I think those are all things we need to think about, is that you are wired into the world, even though you may be out in the middle of nowhere. You are wired to the world. And so, I'm talking to several major machinery manufacturers. They say to me point blank, they said, I can tell you, we have upped our game and are working on that to make sure those systems don't get hacked, because we know we can't have problems in the spring and the fall. I mean, those are critical times for, for food production. So I think that's the other thing, and you think all the way up the line, your elevator, your packer, all those people need to be in line to make sure they can take your product and move it through the food system. And we know too, we talked earlier about, inflation, and think about, or what's available on the store shelves. If that food manufacturer can't produce because their systems are down, then that means the consumer is not getting their food on the other end. So I think it's a really important thing. And I think it was a bit of a wake-up call when a cooperative got hit in the middle of Iowa, like, wow, how could that happen? And it did.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny you talk about, being dead in the water, and if things
Yeah.
shut down. I was talking to my father the other day, actually this past weekend, and he goes, times have changed, right? He goes, if technology fails out on me now, I don't plant, right? There is
Right.
our planter's not ground driven anymore, things of that nature. You rely on technology to
That's right.
really get that crop in, right? So I think making
Yeah.
sure that you have the most secure system, and that everything's taken care of on that side, I think is a pretty important factor for farmers.
Yep, absolutely. And your dad's absolutely right. He's dead in the water. And so make sure your systems at home are buttoned up, because, they're all connected and they're networked into lots of different places. I can tell you, the financial institutions, my computer's it takes 5 minutes to boot up in the morning to get all the security up and running. Um, it's frustrating, but at the same time, that is a big thing among regulators to make sure that you have a secure system. So
Well, one of the other pieces, that you talked about was really, where folks are investing at, and just some of the next big things here. One of the things that we hear a lot about is sustainable farming,
mhm.
and really, trying to get that carbon capture. What are your thoughts and outlooks on, a lot of these different carbon programs that are starting to roll in, and
Right.
farmers starting to sign on to?
Right. I will tell you, we are both, as a research group and as a bank, we are just, I'm going to say, we're crawling into that. We have a carbon bank within Rabobank, and we have a pilot program with, it was about 13,000 acres last year, centered kind of around southeast Iowa and in that area, western Illinois. We did some pilot programs with farmers to understand what's happening on their farm. What is that soil capable of capturing, and what does that mean to you, and what is it worth to the farmer? We're just learning, and I'll be real honest about that up front. We're just learning about that. I think the challenge that we see from a production standpoint is that there's so many variables in that soil when you look at carbon capture and stuff. What is it? What kind of soil is it? Soil between Idaho and Iowa are completely different soils, or Illinois. I mean, they're not even close to organic matter. What are the crops they're planting? That's important as well. And so, in talking to farmers about carbon farming, they're very interested, but they're also very cautious. And a lot of them are saying, if my soil is so valuable for carbon, then I need to be paid more. And I think there's some validity to that as well. And I think we're also starting to see, I'm going to call NGOs and government agencies thinking about this and thinking, and Europe started this and it's starting to move this way, is that, well, just because I can sell you a carbon credit doesn't, I'm not getting rid of carbon emissions. And so you're starting to see regulatory structures or investor pressure say, okay, you can buy so much of your carbon emissions by carbon credits, but you need to actually reduce carbon emissions. And so you're starting to see that happen as well. But I do think that there is potential here, but we're also working in this whole sustainability, and it revolves around lots of things. It's not just about the environment. It's not just about water. It's not just about soil. It's also about social, community involvement, economic sustainability, succession planning, all those things, because we know that all of those things are help to preserve the sustainability of that farm long term. And we know farms that have been around for 4, 5, 6 generations, and we know what they've done well. But I think we need to really start to sit down and collect that data and really document what we're doing on the farm to help the environment, help the sustainability of that farm from a holistic point of view. So then that's what we're looking at as a bank.
Yeah, and that's again going back to our farm as well, and I've
Yeah.
mentioned this before on this podcast, which is Dad and I started looking at getting into cover crops, right, and running
Right.
some cover crop trials and things of that nature, and it's one of those where I think the more types of programs that we can get out there that really drive that sustainability conversation, I think you get a lot more farmers trying to adopt those types of practices, or at least even try them on their farm, even if they haven't done it in the past.
Right. And then, and farmers are inherently cautious because they have a lot of, they have a lot of risk out there. And I'm not being critical of that at all. I mean, I think that's a proper thing to do. But they want to see how it works maybe on their neighbor's farm they're very willing to learn. And I think there's a real hunger to learn, but we're in that crawling stage. We're not walking, let alone running into this at this point. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, there is a lot of things to do. Absolutely.
That's where I always look at, social media and things of that nature. I think have driven that conversation even faster, right? Because it allows you to, you say you want to see it on your neighbor's farm.
Right.
Well, hey, you and I can be neighbors if we're connected on social media, right? And and sharing different things, and it's just a pretty neat area to go to just get
Yep.
more information and like I said, maybe get more comfortable, right?
Yeah, and I think it's getting more comfortable. And one of the things that we've tried to do within the bank is to try to get farmers to connect with each other. What are you doing? What are you not doing? What worked, what not? And we've had farmers. We did a roundtable with some farmers at a conference this year that were clients, and they were very honest. We tried this and it failed, and it was costly. But we backed up and we took another run at it and we did something different. So, all those things are important.
Yep. No, absolutely. Well, I tell you what, one of the other things I wanted to call out as well, you all have a really popular podcast over on your side of the business as well, don't you?
We do. We try on a monthly basis to do the North American Grains and Oilseeds podcast. You can get it at any of your servers. Just put in North American Rabobank podcast and it'll come up, and you can listen to any number of things. You can listen to grains and oilseeds. You can listen to beverages. So we encourage you, and we will also do podcasts on some of our research, so people can, if they like the podcast, they can go get the research and actually read it. But go do it. Go to your podcast search engine and type it in, and you'll be able to find it.
Well, you all do a wonderful job
Thank
over
you.
there, and I think sharing that knowledge with your listeners, I think, is absolutely wonderful. I mean, to be able to
Thank
get access to that kind of knowledge. So,
well, we appreciate the plug, and thank you for listening. And it's always been really interesting. We're trying to do a little bit different and add some of the colleagues globally to get sort of a global perspective, because that's what we're a global bank. And so we try to do that. And I think this year we're going to try to bring on some special guests that are not really, not connected to the bank, and get their views as well. So
nice. Well, I look forward to that. So,
thank you.
well, I also want to say, Steve, just thank you for coming on here today, and especially where it sounds like you're even busier than what you were were last time I talked to you. So, thank you for taking time and visiting with us here today.
It's my pleasure. It's always good to talk to you, and I hope the listeners enjoy the conversation we had.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And let's hopefully it's not over a year for the next time that we talk. So
yeah, let's do it in a few months rather than a whole year. So that would be great.
Exactly. So
that'd be great.
Well, Steve, thanks again, and you take care.
Thank you, Clint. Good to see you as always. Take care.
Hey, a special thanks to Steve for joining us here today and sharing his knowledge with all of us. Also, thank you, the listener. If you like this podcast, make sure to hit that like button, comment, and subscribe, and be sure to share it with one of your friends. Also, Around the Farm is brought to you by Climate FieldView, and you can find our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts at. And it's been an absolute blast today, and we'll see you around the farm.